All right, so there's an old story that I don't know that it's true, but it sure should be. And the story of a young couple, and the wife decides to make roast for her husband, and so she begins to prepare the roast. And as she's doing this, she just chops the ends off the roast before she cooks it. And he says, "Why are you doing that?" She goes, "What do you mean? Why do you do that? That's how you cook roast." It's like, "What do you mean that's how you cook roast?" He says, "Well, that's the way my mom has always done it." So next time he gets a chance to hang out with his mother-in-law, he says, "So do you cut the roast, like the ends off of the roast before you cook it?" And she goes, "Well, of course." It's like, "Well, why?" He says, "Well, because that's how you cook roast." So what do you mean? He says, "Well, that's the way my mother did it." So sure enough, Grandma's still alive, and he gets a chance to talk to her and says, "Do you cut the ends of your roast off when you cook it?" She goes, "Absolutely." He said, "Why?" He says, "Well, because my oven's too small for a full-size roast, and I need to cut this." See, it makes me wonder, why is it that you and I do the things we do each day? I mean, you get up in the morning and you head off to school, or you're heading off to work, or the kind of things you do, or maybe you are the one who sits in your pajamas and watches TikTok all day. Whatever it is that you do on a regular basis, as you decide about how to go about that, why? Why are you doing that? I mean, at some level, there's probably certain circumstances. Well, I've got bills to pay, so I'm going to go to work. I live in a place where I have to go to school, whatever it is. There's some parts of circumstance, but there's other parts of it where we choose some of the habits and the life that we live. I think it's super important for us to be cognizant of that as we continue our series, because we want to ask the question, are you and I, in the context we're in, doing the right thing? Are we in line with what it is that God has for us? Are we contributing to the kingdom? Are we making a difference in the world? Do our lives matter? We've been doing this series in Genesis, where I've been encouraging you to read. Now, not all of Genesis necessarily, though that would be great, but that we've curated 15 different stories that we think everybody should know. Definitely Christians should know, but even if you're not a person of faith, just being an educated person would mean knowing these stories. And we're encouraging you to read it this following week, and this is our longer one. It's going to be 3 different chapters. But, and I would love to know, as a matter of fact, if you still have your connection card there, I would love for you to put something on there for me. We have been encouraging you to read it, so I'm not reading the story to you. I maybe summarize it a little bit, but just encourage you to read it during that week, and I want to know how that's going for you. If you could just put, just a quick word, maybe good. It's been good. I've been able to read. I've been enjoying at least when I do. I think it's been kind of a neat change of pace to be given the passage and be encouraged to read it that next week. Maybe you can put a couple words, a few words of not so good. If you don't really like that idea, you'd rather me read it to you each week. You'd rather me tell you the story and those kind of things, and then you reflect on it. If that's it, or maybe you can put something like, I don't know, because you didn't even know we were doing this. But whatever it is, I would love some feedback on whether that's been helpful and whether you've been taking advantage of it. But let me catch you up to where we are this morning as we are continuing the adventures of Joseph. As I mentioned last week, we're gonna finish off this series, just story after story after story of Joseph. Now, realize what's going on and how it's going. That what has happened is, from the very beginning, in Genesis 1, Genesis 3, we saw this idea that God is going to redeem his people, that he's going to redeem humanity, that there is something about breaking against the very evil of sin that had happened. And we got this whole sense that he was doing something new because he told Abraham that, I'm choosing you. I'm choosing you to make a people after. And so Abraham has a son Isaac, and Isaac has a son Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel. And Israel has 12 different sons, of whom he favored Joseph the most. Now Joseph was betrayed by his brothers. And that's where you're going to pick up this next week in reading the 3 chapters as you see story after story after Joseph of what he is doing. The 3 stories, and these are the blanks in your outline if you want to follow along, The first is about Potiphar and his wife. You may recall that last week it ended with the idea that he was sold into slavery and that slavery to Potiphar. You're going to hear about his adventures living as a slave in Potiphar's home. Potiphar is a high-level official, and Joseph does well. I mean, Potiphar really likes how capable he is, seems to see God at work in the sense of great stuff is happening, so he puts him in charge of his entire household. And yet his wife likes the fact that Joseph is young and handsome, and demands, says, hey, I want you to come sleep with me without my husband or the staff knowing. And after a series of times when he just simply refuses over and over, she concocts this story that he tried to rape her, and Potiphar has him sent to prison. Which, by the way, I would love your take. As you read this text, I think it's really fascinating. As a high-level Egyptian official, I would think he has the authority to have Joseph killed for trying to rape his wife. But he doesn't kill him. He instead sends him to prison. I wonder if Potiphar knows about his wife, suspects what's going on, and knows what kind of woman she is, and instead just is going to get rid of him to save his house. I don't know. I encourage you to read it and get back to me what you think. But in any case, we see this idea of Joseph sold into slavery. He works hard. He seems to rise up to some level of prominence in his context, and then things get worse. And then we have a second story that follows pretty much the same pattern. He goes to prison with servants of the Pharaoh. He's sent to prison, and there are these servants, specifically a baker and a cupbearer. And they had gotten in trouble with the Pharaoh, and so they were in prison as well. And he rises to some level of prominence. He's taking care of people, at least the cupbearer and the baker. And they have these dreams. They have two specific dreams and they're, I don't know, they seem to think that these dreams mean something. And they're upset that they don't have access to the court wizards or whatever that can tell the dream. So they say, who's going to interpret it? And Joseph's like, hey, I've got some experience with dreams. So he begins to share what he sees as the meaning behind this, of what God has shown him. And for the cupbearer, it's great. He says, you're going to be out of here in a few days, and you're going to be restored. And to the baker, well, I guess you're going to be out of here in a few days too, but it's not going to be so good for you. And these dreams end up coming true, and he asks the cupbearer, he says, just speak some good words for me. Try that I'm still here. And we hear that the cupbearer doesn't, or the cupbearer doesn't. By the way, cupbearer, it just means somebody who holds cups. That's all it does in life. No, that's not necessarily true. The food taster, he tried to make sure the food wasn't poisoned, because who wants to kill a cupbearer? And so kind of level of bodyguard protections for the Pharaoh. But in any case, he gets forgotten about. So here he is, another time of rising to the top, and that nothing gets better for him. And then the last story in the third chapter you're going to read is Pharaoh and his dreams. So Pharaoh later has dreams of his own. He has two different dreams that apparently are part of the same thing, and he can't get anybody to interpret them. And all of a sudden, cupbearer goes, hey, I remember this guy. This one guy is able to talk like he did in prison, and let's bring him up. And Joseph comes up, and he does interpret. In the dream, I want to spend a little bit of time on this. The dream is that there are 7 fat cows, 7 really fat cows that are later eaten by 7 really skinny cows. And Joseph explains to him that what's going to happen is there's going to be a famine. You're going to have 7 years that are going to be really good, high yield years agriculturally. And then 7 years of famine that are going to be so severe they're going to eat up all the good stuff you had before. So what you need to do is find somebody really smart, really discerning, really wise to kind of run to make sure you collect enough food during the good times so that when things are hard, you have it available. And the Pharaoh says, well, if we're talking about wise and discerning people, I choose you. I want you to run everything. And so we see Joseph rising at a very high level in the Egyptian government, pretty much second to Pharaoh himself. The reason I'm going to spend some time on that is because of the fact that, is that possible? I think such an amazing imagery of the idea that in really good times, the Lord can provide for times that aren't so good. This is the image we have used here at Linwood Friends. We have used this idea of Linwood Friends to when we're thinking about selling this property out here. That the people before had a vision. When people at Linwood bought this property and had a vision for, I've heard different stories, for expanded facilities, for a school, for all these things. And yet we thought, well, maybe, unbeknownst to them, that God had provided that as during good times, so that now when things are really lean and we're not even sure we can make it past the end of this year, the way that we're currently doing ministry, whether that might help and provide some of that. Or whatever it is. So we don't know. So that imagery is huge, but it really kind of begs the question, because we see for Joseph that God has a plan for him. God is going to do something amazing. He's going to save a nation. This whole famine and stuff saves so many thousands of people. But it also has the effect, as we're going to see in the next few weeks, it has the effect of saving his family. That the tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Israel, are going to be able to continue on precisely because Joseph aligned himself with the plan that God had, even though he didn't know the plan. And there were multiple opportunities he had to completely derail it. 3 temptations. The first one was that of sex. When Potiphar's wife, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." I don't know if that's necessarily the best translation. I'm not a Hebrew scholar by any means. But that phrase is just 2 words in Hebrew that basically is the wife going, "Sex now." In an imperative form, it is a command. This woman is used to being obeyed. So he had every opportunity, everything that whether it's the culture at the time or certainly the culture in this house, he could have derailed it if he went ahead and followed her commands. And see, he says that he can't because it's wrong. And it's not just wrong because Potiphar's wife is married to Potiphar, but because Joseph isn't married to her. I think about the idea of the temptation of sex in our culture. All right, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but let me give you an example. I remember growing up and going to church, and my family liked to go out for Halloween. We dress up in costumes. I was very fond of the $6 Million Man. And go out in costumes and go trick-or-treat for candy. But there were a lot of folks at the church who said, no, Halloween is of the devil and you shouldn't do that. And I know that some of you here still have problems with Halloween. That's fine. That's fine. That's not my point this morning, apart from our reaction, which was that we said, okay, well, we're still going to do this, but we just won't talk about it. And I feel like, as in many ways, that our culture moved as our culture started pinning more and more of all its hope and meaning on the idea of sex. I can't think of a culture in all of human history that has seemed to put more idea of who we are and our identity and our happiness on sex and sexuality than our current culture. And as I began to see that happen, I felt like a lot of us were in places that there were a number of folks in the church that approached it much like we approached Halloween, which is, yeah, I know you guys don't like it, but we're going to do what we're going to do. But I think our culture has shifted to the extent that there isn't anything more regressive and old-fashioned and dumb about Christianity than its take on sexuality. And that's a huge issue for a lot of people. And I want to tell you that, look, I'm not preaching to try to get anybody to feel guilty. I'm asking simply that you have an open mind, because this is a big deal. I mean, if we're right. And here's the thing that's fascinating. I hear people talk about how, whatever, all religions are basically the same, and that's so not true. Man, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything that all the major religions seem to agree on. There's very little that they agree on. But this is one. The idea that sex outside of any other context but a marital relationship is frowned on about every single one. And so I would just ask, if you are not convinced, that you would just have an open mind and pursue it. I think it is worth considering, that we just so easily, and our culture so easily dismisses it. Because it would have derailed, for Joseph, had he done it, it would have derailed God's plan. And maybe for a lot of us, there's the threat that it might derail God's plan for us. But there was another temptation as well. the temptation of despair. Joseph finally, he did the right thing and he gets put to prison. And he rises up and he continues to care for people. And maybe he has a chance. He sees this chance. He's continuing to be faithful and honoring of God and says, hey, remember me. And the chapter ends with this heartbreaking line of the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. I know a number of you feel that pain. Like society has forgotten you. You live your life and you're doing things and things aren't turning out the way you wanted to. You feel like you can't even reach some level of normal and nobody seems to know, nobody seems to care. You're just putting your nose to the grindstone and can feel forgotten. You understand that idea of despair. I mean, it's not that we need a parade. It's not that we need fame. But man, it sure would be nice if it just got a little bit easier. And here's Joseph, and it's not getting easier. He could have just ended despair and says, forget it. It doesn't matter. I'm not going forward. I just give up. I'll just wallow here in prison. But he didn't. He kept going. And so his third temptation was actually a temptation of success. Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Meaning, I'm not giving up my power, but I need you to do this for me. Joseph easily could have just said, well, this is awesome. I finally succeeded. I am smart. I am wise. I'm discerning. My good and hard work finally paid off. And that is another huge cultural push for us, right? That the overwhelming idea here in the United States is if there's those who suggest if you just work hard and you put your nose to the grindstone, your talent, your success, and your intelligence will finally help you rise. And when you rise, it was all about you. You worked hard, you did it, and really what other people need to do is just be as hardworking as you. But really, where do you think you got that talent? Where did you get that ability? Where did you get those smarts? He could have been derailed by thinking it was all about him. And he would have been derailed from God's plan. So if that's us, if you feel like you are at a place where you could easily be all about you because you're a victim of success, or you're in a place of despair or any other kind of temptation, I want to point out three things that Joseph did to be able to weather this. And I think this is important for us. Especially when we don't know what God's doing. Because you see, Joseph didn't understand what God was doing necessarily. It doesn't have any indication that he knew this ultimate plan that he was going to finally be able to help save a nation and save his family. He didn't know part of this big thing. And yet, God kept step by step having him in a new place. Step by step. And Joseph didn't derail that by at least three things that I see in the text. The first is integrity. His willingness to just be who he is no matter what the circumstances. To be the same. That regardless of what the culture was of Egypt generally or the culture of Potiphar's house, despite the commands of his superiors, he said, I am going to do my best to live up to God's standards. Even if it causes me more difficulty, even if it causes me more trouble, I am going to do that. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to cheat. There are so many opportunities for you and I in our culture to say, no one will ever know. I can just do this and no one will ever know. But maybe even that phrase of when we whisper that in our own minds that no one will ever know, that's a chance for us to be derailed from God's plan for us. But also knowing that when we live with integrity, even when nobody knows, has a chance to continue on with the plan that God has for us. So one of the things we want to do is commit ourselves to integrity. The second is to keep the focus on God. Because especially when it comes to sin and temptation, like what do you do? Like if there's a bad habit, if there's something going on, what do we do? Well, I know. We live here in Portland. I know what we do. We go to the self-help section of a bookstore and we do all the stuff it says to do in the back of the book. And we just try harder and we become better. And it asks us, make a point of who you want to be and then make decisions and goals and then do that. And that's how you become. But that's not at all how our faith works. It's not about forcing ourselves and trying harder to be good people. It's about focusing on God. You see, Christianity makes a wild claim that you and I are broken and that we can't fix ourselves, but what we can do is fix our eyes on Jesus. And that we don't get ourselves better and then therefore God loves us, but that God loves us and redeems us, and therefore we have the power to be better. And as true as that is with sin and temptation, it's also true with success. If you find some modicum of success and ability, that it's not about you. It's really about you submitting to what God has given and using that. And so you should never become so full of yourself. Do you see what the trap is? We come up with some standards of who we are to be and who we should be. And some of us reach those standards and we think we're all that, and others of us fail, and we just beat ourselves with guilt. But instead, we wipe away and say, no, this is about God and what God has for me, and I want to focus on that. And third, where we'll end this morning, is to simply serve where you are. When you don't know what God has for you, take special care of the places God has for you. And I mean that literally, the places. Like, I think we can think about people that we should love and care about, and the important people come to mind, our family members and our friends and the people we like. But I wonder if instead we ought to think about some of the people we don't like. And maybe a neat way to do about that is place. Think about our places. And so when we think about place, where are the places you're? Maybe in your neighborhood, are there some people? Do you have some neighbors who don't know Jesus? Do you have some folks that aren't currently going to church? How might you be able to serve them right in the place that you are? How about your school or your place of work? Are there people who don't know Jesus, who are going to church, and you could have a chance to just serve and care for them, whatever that looks like in that moment? Certainly your family, certainly places here, right here at Linwood. We mentioned this morning that our whole purpose is to love God, love one another, and live out our faith every day. This is the living out faith every day part that just says, wherever I am, wherever it is that God has me, sure, He can tell me to go someplace else, but I haven't heard that. I don't know what He wants. I just don't know what's next. Then let's just be faithful with what's in front of us. I say that because I think this is the place that Linwood Friends Church is in. For those of you who don't know, the land was sold last week. And that answers some questions for us. Some of the questions like, what are we going to do after the end of this year? Like, those questions are answered for us now, and that is exciting. But what does God want us to do? How are we supposed to go forward? What does He have in terms of for the kingdom work? What does He have for making a difference in this community? What does He have for difference in helping us figure out better what it means to love God, to love one another, and live out our faith every day? How do we do that? And the truth is, I don't know. I don't know what God has next. But since we don't know, then this is what we have to do. We have to go back to this idea, doing things the way that God would have us to do it, keep our focus on God, and just keep serving Him where we are, and keep doing the last thing He told us to do until He does us to do something different. So 2 applications for this. One, for you in your life. I just want you to really think about your daily life. Your life in terms of where you work and who you're with and the places you're in, and to really think about what is God calling you to do, and are you in line with that? Are you living a life of integrity? Are you keeping your focus on God, and are you just serving in these places that you're in? But I want to take advantage of something this morning, and the fact that we are here together and that we want to devote ourselves to God in prayer as well. So what I would like us all to do, instead of our normal ending here, I'm encouraging us, if we can all we're going to get up and we're going to go down this hall, into this room here in this fellowship hall, and out the door back there so we can see the land. And I've asked 3 of our elders if they would help us pray so that we can pray not only for what the land has been, but what it will be, as well as pray for us. So if you are willing, and we're just going to do this and we will end our service out there, if you are willing to just get up and go, and for those of you who need a little bit of help with mobility, we've got that, and just head down the hall through this worshipful, and we will go out there and pray together. And I know you weren't expecting it, so if you want to sneak out the front, you can do that.